Okay, so welcome to this 1 hour session with TTP. And I'm Sage. I'm going to be leading today's session. And I'm an instructor with TTP. And I'm going to be talking about, or hopefully more than just talking, engaging you with how to improve your GMAT verbal score by thinking critically. So just before we dive into the material, I should say that I teach courses with TTP. And you probably have heard the self-study platform, but there are also some LiveTeach classes going on, led by instructors like me. And I'm located in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in the UK, although you can probably hear from my accent, I'm actually English, and London is my hometown. But I teach GMAT, but actually, a word of context, I teach some other things as well. I've done a lot of high school math tutoring. I've taught English language. I did that for quite a while. You maybe see there's my piano behind me. I also teach music. And I see a lot of crossover between these skills. I love learning stuff, and I love helping other people to learn things. And I like this interesting question of skills, because that is really where the real magic happens. Information, well, that's kind of easy. In fact, information doesn't kind of have such a big role to play in the GMAT. It's not a lot of information we need to know, but we need to know how to do things. And thinking critically is one of the key skills that we need to master to do well on, especially the verbal section, but actually I would kind of cross it over to the quant section as well. So that'll be our focus today. And we're going to be looking at, particularly as you might imagine, some critical reasoning. Although I think that critical reasoning and reading comprehension, if you're not familiar with the GMAT, those are the two question types in the verbal section. I think they have an awful lot in common. And I hope to make this quite general in terms of skills, in terms of actually some study advice, and even just how to approach the test. So let's get started with a question. In fact, we're not going to do this question straight away. I just want to give you an example. This is a critical reasoning question. You don't have to answer it, but please do look up here at the passage and just take in those 2 or 3 sentences. Okay, so it's a random context. But before we answer this question, I want to focus on the kind of thing that we see in the passage. So let's not worry about the answer choices. This passage up here is an argument. It says here, weaken the argument. So this begs the question, really, what is an argument? Now, this might seem like a very simple question or a deceptive question, but we need to be very clear about this. So if you have any doubt about what an argument is, listen up. Because you might think it's some kind of fight, some kind of disagreement, and it can be. That's one meaning of the word. But here we're talking more like a legal argument, philosophical argument. And this is more like what we're dealing with. Here we go. What's an argument? Excuse me, what's going on with my slides here? I seem to have frozen. Here we are. What's an argument? So we're dealing with more like a legal or a philosophical argument. And we have an opinion. Here's an example. I think it's going to rain tomorrow. Oh, excuse me, something's sort of frozen in my computer. Here we go. I think it's going to rain tomorrow. That's an opinion. Now, it's a good starting point for an argument, but it's not an argument yet. I believe something. It is an opinion, but to make it an argument, we need to support it with some evidence, some reasons. And that's what we're dealing with an argument. We present an opinion, just like a lawyer in court, but they don't just present the opinion, they give some evidence, some reasons to back it up. We can go more specific, though. In the GMAT, you'll often see arguments labeled as premises and conclusions. And that's our simple formula, that an argument is a premise and a conclusion. It may be some other things as well, but that's the basics. So, by the way, Aaron, that's a good question, but I'm going to address that in a few minutes' time, if that's all right. So, dealing with arguments, that's our starting point, and we're going to apply this to some questions. Here's the one that we saw. Let's see if we can distinguish, what is that opinion? What are they claiming? And what's their evidence? What's supporting their claim? Take a moment to analyze, please. Cool. So by the way, I know there's so many people in the room. I'm not going to be able to interact with everybody individually. I'm going to keep it a little bit general. I know that in a smaller class, I'd be kind of picking you out and calling on you, etc. But let's keep it a little general. The main opinion is this part. We're going to call that the conclusion. I believe, and we can get that intuitively. Just that's the part where the person is hitting their hand on the desk. I believe, surely. But we've also got some logical clues as well. Surely is one of them. Only, rarely, will. And I think is going to be somewhat contentious. And that's their conclusion. And to support it, they've got some evidence about the park ranges and the coordinates, etc., and how this plan is going to work. So there we've got it. But we want to go further than that. Thinking critically means not just being passive and sitting back. It means being active and engaging and actually thinking, can I criticize this proposal as I would in an ordinary situation? Bring your active thinking just as you would at work or in any other situation. So let's treat this a little bit like a meeting and go, is this actually really a good plan? Is there anything that could go wrong here? And at this point, I will pause, and please do put some thoughts into the chat window. Could anything go wrong with this plan? Okay, good. Thank you for your input, Carl. But hey, this time I do want to hear what you're thinking. And yes, there are lots and lots and lots of things that we can respond to here. And in fact, if you're having trouble thinking of how to respond, this might be one of the big traps of the GMAT, which is we're so keen to be right that we actually kind of freeze up a little bit. And I think thinking critically means kind of chilling out a bit. It's kind of just like bouncing ideas around as you would in a work context, in a productive meeting. You wouldn't want your colleagues to just be fixated on the correct answer and not actually throw up any interesting ideas. So excellent. I'm reading a lot of cool things, and please join me in doing that in the chat window. Yeah, there's some things about the parks are large and they spread fast, etc., etc. Okay, because this kind of thinking is going to prepare us for choosing an answer choice. So let's have a look at this one. And this time, yeah, do finish the problem. Please, choose an answer and let me know in the chat window which letter you think it is. Let's I haven't actually labeled them, but yes, there's a sort of ambiguities now in the GMAT. They sort of sometimes put A, B, C, D, E, and sometimes they just put the dots there. So yes, please choose a letter from A, B, C, D, E, which fits the situation best. And I saw someone had their hand up. If they want to send me a message, you can actually send me a private message by clicking on my name if you're not familiar with Zoom. I'll try to respond. Cool. And you might have had the satisfying experience of having the right answer just kind of jump out at you. The correct answer for this one is D. And now I'm not going to go through all the answers, but I did see that some people were tempted by B. And I'll just say, if you're tempted by B, keep your eye on the conclusion, because the claim was that only rarely will campfires start forest fires in the park. So if we look at B, it's a good example of something when talking not about campfires. Now, if I was making the argument and you said answer choice B to me, I could fairly put my hands up and say, wait a minute, I didn't say anything about other types of fires. Yes, maybe the park is going to burn down from lightning. We don't know. And to be frank, I don't care at this point, because my claim was only about campfires. So this is actually this attention to detail of looking for the conclusion and addressing that specific conclusion about campfires, and not getting sucked into perhaps the wide issue about, protecting the forest in the park, or other good issues which we care about because we're nice people, but actually aren't an issue in this argument. So the correct answer is going to be D for this one, and it points to something which some of you even mentioned about the time taken. Yes, fair and good plan, but what if it takes them a long time to respond to the fires, and that would be a hole in the plan. Good. And in fact, Isadora, you asked exactly the question that I'm going to address now, which is about pre-thinking answers. And I think I should address this because it comes up so much in the literature on critical thinking, not least in the TTP course. And basically, what I did there, I'm going to be a little bit kind of evasive. I'm going to say we didn't pre-think the answer. I asked you for suggestions. I did not ask you for the correct answer. So actually, I want to apply critical thinking to this question because there's a lot of advice, and if you haven't heard of it, about the dangers of pre-thinking. And I kind of agree with that. Yeah, when we say pre-thinking, it's when you read the argument to start with, you get a fixed idea of like, this is going to be the correct answer. And then you look through and then, hey, you don't find what you're looking for, and you can get really stuck. So that's often what's meant by pre-thinking. However, we can overreact to that and say, don't think at all. And that's not a good piece of advice, because if we're not thinking at all, we're not really engaging with the passage. So I prefer to actually avoid that whole debate, because I know what we did there was sort of pre-thinking. I would describe it as just engagement. We just engaged with the argument. We just kind of, ideas bubbled up as we were engaging with it. We didn't fixate on one answer. And I think to put this in context of the GMAT, we can see what type of question we're dealing with here. We're looking for most seriously weakens. We're not looking for a perfect answer. And there are many, many things that could weaken, as we saw from the suggestions. It could be the timing. It could be like there's some other problem with the relay system. It could be that there are just simply too many campfires to deal with. There's not enough drones to go around. There's loads of weaknesses. And this is where the kind of advice against pre-thinking comes in. We don't know which one of those weaknesses we're going to need to look out for in the answer choice. But actually, having a few ideas is something which I think just goes hand in hand with good engagement. So I hope that answers your question about pre-thinking, and actually says a few more things about the GMAT, not least about this question type. We're not looking for a perfect answer. We're looking for the best answer out of these ones for certain types of critical reasoning problems, when it says most seriously. So let's put that into practice a little bit more. We're going to go further with this question. We're not just going to think about this one, because it was a little bit of a sort of entry-level problem. I think some of you found this sort of a little, easier to deal with. I want to generalize. I want to go further. I want to say, yeah, what kind of flaw does this argument make? So back to the chat window, if you've got any responses to that question, and I know it's a slightly puzzling one, but can you generalize, like, what was the sort of issue with this argument, and in fact with the correct answer choice as well? Good. It made many assumptions, but which assumption then was the one that they played on in this correct answer? Let me go back and show you the whole problem. There was one kind of particular assumption that they played on, and it wasn't just assuming that the plan would work, because that's too easy. That's too general. I mean, every plan they're going to assume that it works in some sense. Yeah, Karam, I think you're pretty close there. It seems, but there's something. Yeah, this is what I'm thinking of. And now, I know actually we're doing some general thinking. There's more than kind of one answer here, but what I'd like you to point towards is this issue of time. That we can have a good plan, but if it takes too long, it's not going to work. And that's something which we can think very widely. I mean, in fact, we can think about that as GMAT. Yeah, I'm really good at solving GMAT problems in 10 minutes. Well, I'm afraid you're not going to succeed on the test. Like, being good at solving GMAT problems is no good unless there's the timing issue. And this is something which applies to not just the GMAT, but here we've got forest fires and many other situations. That's a kind of a generalization. Now, that's going to help us, because if we can see patterns in arguments, if we can go further than just this question and think a little bit more generally, we're going to get quicker at learning and preparing for future problems. So let's see if we can put that into practice again with another question. This time, again, I'm going to cover up the answer choices. And I'm going to show you this argument. Again, we've got something about a plan. So yeah, what's the main claim here? Take a moment to read and decide for yourself. Okay, so this is one of those skills, being able to read a passage and hone in quickly on, yeah, what are they claiming? What is this plan that they're doing? What's their aim? It will, again, that clue for the future, it will result in the grapes remaining on the vines unharmed. And actually, we could put this, since the dogs will scare away birds, we've got some reasons using this low cost approach that does not harm birds. This is, we've got some description of the plan, we've got some reasons supporting their aim there. Okay, now, importantly, actually, we don't have to get every last detail. Here's one tip, and certainly anyone who's got a GMAT exam this week, if there's one thing I could say about critical reasoning, find that conclusion. What are they claiming? What's their big claim? Because so many answer choices exploit the trap of being a little vague about what are they actually claiming, and we can quote it. Don't paraphrase. It will result in the grapes remaining on the vines unharmed. That's the big claim here. So yeah, again, let's do our critical thinking. Like back to the chat window. What are the problems with the plan? What could go wrong? Use your everyday common sense knowledge. Yeah, and I'm glad to see the word assumes, because that's kind of what's going on here. All these gaps in the argument, they're assumptions. And as we said, there are many, many assumptions. These are bad arguments. In fact, whenever you see a strength and weaken question, or most question types in the GMAT, critical reasoning, you can know that there must be a bad argument. There must be some gaps here because that's what makes it interesting to study. So even if we don't see those assumptions straight away, we can know that there's going to be at least one, but probably a whole bunch. Yeah, and this is where your real world knowledge comes into play. Like that's another kind of good discussion. Like, oh, we don't want to use background knowledge. Well, I kind of know what you mean. You don't need to be a specialist in the area, but you do need to know the meaning of the words. You do need to understand, like at least the idea of plants and animals to be able to understand the argument. So we can't avoid using some background knowledge. And yes, this is where our imagination comes in. Yeah, what could the dogs do? They could I suppose it could be all sorts of the dogs just run away, or the dogs do, have some that they don't have enough food or water, or it's a wrong climate for them, or there's some other, somebody steals the dogs. All these things could go wrong, and I think I'm seeing some good suggestions. You can get wilder and wilder with your assumptions with these. Good. Okay, Isadora, there's a totally different question about the order of sections. I can't answer that one briefly, I'm afraid. But I have to say, follow your instinct probably is my simple answer to choosing the section order. Okay, so having done our critical engagement, let's repeat the process and choose an answer choice, please. Okay, so this time I'll give a little bit more attention to some of those other answer choices, because we can expect to be surprised. In some questions, the right answer is going to kind of jump out and it feels very comfortable. On others, we have to kind of do a little bit more groundwork, and we might well need to come back to answer choices. So my principle is eliminate the easier ones first if we can, and then maybe get down to 2 answer choices. And at worst, we might just have to bite the bullet and take a guess if we don't have time. So if we look at these answer choices, causing problems here. If we look at these answer choices, we can see that answer A says that the grapes are not their preferred food. So, okay, so for many types of birds, now that doesn't really affect things, because sure, okay, some birds or even many birds don't like the grapes, but some birds clearly do eat the grapes, otherwise they wouldn't be making the argument. So what we're doing here is we're taking answer A, we're slotting it in to the knowledge of the argument. We actually have to remember the argument or remember the situation, imagine the situation, and see if answer A is going to make any difference. And we can say rightfully that actually A isn't going to affect this argument significantly. Answer choice B says something about netting. In fact, it says it's expensive and must be replaced. So it's kind of saying netting is a bad idea. Well, is that supportive of the idea that dogs are gonna protect the grapes? Well, actually, fine about the netting. The netting isn't gonna be a great plan, but it doesn't really help us know about whether the dogs will protect the grapes. If the dogs are inactive, some birds. Okay, so this one actually, it does something which you can expect many answer choices to do. It does the opposite. This actually is a weakener of the plan. We're looking for a reason why the dogs will help the grapes, not why they won't. So that's a reason to eliminate answer choice C. And answer choice D, yes, you might have got the picture now, is looking pretty good, because I guess if they did chew on the grapes, that would be a problem. So knowing that they don't chew on the grapes is a plus. And then here's another thing about migratory birds. So an extra detail about the birds, which sure they're migratory, but they could still harm the grapes. They're still a problem. In fact, we sort of know that they're a problem already from the argument. So keeping our eyes on the conclusion helped us. And for this one, perhaps we don't need to go back for a sort of second run of answer choices. But we can also see how answer choice D works. Notice this time I gave you a strengthened question, something to support the conclusion. But actually, answer choice D works by plugging one of the gaps that was a weakness in the argument. So this is why I group strengthen and weaken together, and I certainly teach them together in our classes, because they're really operating the same idea that we've got a situation, an argument, a plan, and we can either point out the weakness or we can plug the gap that is the weakness, and that's what answer choice D does. So good. Okay, a couple of follow-ups from this good question. First of all, actually, we were talking about plans and arguments more or less interchangeably, and I should note that I kind of do that because I don't think it makes a huge difference, but we should be very clear about how, if at all, it differs, or even just how the language can be matched up. Because I talked about an argument being a premise, some reasons or evidence supporting a conclusion. And I like the idea of the lawyer in court going, this person is not guilty because, here's this evidence, and they show whatever exhibits they do. So that's kind of the lawyer in court. But the plan is kind of similar. It's more like a plan supporting an objective. So, here's my business model, and here are my reasons X, Y, Z, why the business is going to succeed. It's kind of the same. The conclusion is like, I believe the plan will work, or I believe this will be the plan will fulfill the objective. So we want to be able to be flexible between identifying plans and conclusions, and we can basically say they kind of operate. Okay, I won't say maybe equal is the wrong word, but certainly in parallel ways. Also, then going back to that question, what was the sort of general pattern here? We talked about the flaw in arguments. And in the previous one, we saw something about the timing. A good plan doesn't work if it doesn't happen at the right time. What's the idea? What's the flaw in this plan? Can anyone generalize? Back to the chat window. Dogs can scare. I agree, but that's too specific. That's something about this argument. Yes, there's something about dogs and birds, but maybe, yeah, like it's a provocative question and maybe not an easy one to answer. That don't the moral of the story is don't rely on those dogs, right? That's kind of things. Keep going. So yeah, keep thinking. I'm enjoying reading these. Okay, and I think actually Thuli and Nicholas, I kind of agree with you here. The proposed solution might make things worse. And that's a very real world, very kind of common flaw that people make in lots of real world situations. So connect this up. In fact, let's roll with this. Can anyone think of any parallel situations where the solution is worse than the problem it's trying to solve? Yeah, David, that's a good way of putting it. Maybe you've done a bit of like the kind of your stats or that's the kind of academic, yeah, the unexpected variable. Good, and yes, there's all sorts of actually. That's Elizabeth. That's a good point. There's lots of other things, but let's hold this idea of the kind of I'm going to call it actually the unintended consequence, or maybe just unforeseen consequence. And this is something which comes up quite a lot in GMAT problems, but also in critical thinking more generally. So yeah, go on, use your imagination. Who can think of a situation, maybe something personal, maybe something that they read in the news, where somebody had a plan, but it had an unforeseen consequence? Oh my goodness, that's a very dark example, but yes, that's a very good one, a medical example if you haven't heard of that. But let's make it real. Yeah, I don't want to just hear the general Yash. That's true. It's a sort of malicious variable, and there's some other names for it. That actually, the names are less important than just identifying or making some kind of comparison. Yeah, cute. Yeah, wow. Somebody's an economist. That's quantitative easing. Yeah, that they increasing the money supply. I have simpler examples up my sleeve. Um, but yes, there are many business ideas where they tried to do something and then it changed something else. I think actually my favorite one is in biology when they introduced an animal to deal with some problem and then that got out of control and caused some other problem. I think there's loads of examples of like plants or introducing new animals to kind of what do you call it, invasive species, etc. But now I asked that to make a parallel, to think up another example. And now I know this is a free class and I'm not here to kind of chastise you at all. But that's the kind of engagement. If you are quick at thinking up examples, if you can connect plans and arguments and go, oh yeah, I can think of that. Oh, that's a bit like this, or that's something that I remember from before. That is a sign that you are really thinking critically. So thank you very much, C and Nicholas. Have a gold star. Oh yeah, yes, you've got a good one. Something about yeah, exactly right, exactly what I was mentioning about animals. So let's keep going. I've got at least one more problem I want to do with you, and I want to sort of apply some of the same ideas and get a little bit more depth on some of these critical thinking. So again, I'm going to cover up the answer choices. I want maximum engagement with this plan we've got here. Okay, so hopefully you've read the passage. And yeah, same process. Let's identify what is the aim. She recommended that in order, that's the aim of the plan, to decrease the number of crashes. They're going to have the plan to reduce traffic congestion. And then using this data, there's something about the traffic congestion and the crashes supporting the idea that this plan is going to decrease the number of crashes. So there's our plan. Now, any suggestions? Yeah, let's pull our thoughts. What could go wrong here? I like this. This is the free flow part. This is where, unfortunately, being nervous about the GMAT can really kind of hold us back, because we get so nervous about being wrong that we actually don't have any ideas, or we're not good at just flowing with our creative ideas, and they can be silly ones. You can go wild on this one. Like, maybe, I don't know, like there's going to be some unforeseen problem here. Yeah, go on, Isadora, give me some examples. What could that third variable be? And as I say, yeah, we don't need heaps of background knowledge. We don't need to be city planners to answer this, but we do need to just have the kind of base level of common sense of engagement in the world, and understand at least, well, we have to understand the meaning of congestion and traffic and these things as well. So good. Lots of yes, time of day. There's all sorts of things going on. Okay, let's continue. In fact, I'm going to be looking in my, yeah, you're doing so well today. I'm going to be looking in my bag for, I think, a tough problem to finish on, but I want to analyze this one before we get on to the next problem. So yes, please choose an answer now, see what you can make of this one. Okay, so if you're feeling overwhelmed by these answers, this is what I would recommend that you do, is to write A, B, C, D, E on your paper. I'm not a big fan of writing a lot for critical reasoning, but I certainly would write A, B, C, D, E on my paper and use that to eliminate my answer choices. Good, and I can see I've got some clear favorites of A and D. So let me just, in fact, we can briefly address the other ones, but I think something about it being expensive. The cost is not mentioned. The plan was to reduce the number of crashes by reducing traffic congestion. Sure, there could be a big cost involved, but we're really interested in this connection between the traffic congestion and the number of crashes. Late at night, yeah, I mean, I guess that could be another cause of the crashes, but the congestion still could potentially decrease the number of crashes. We're looking at that connection between congestion and crashes, and in particular, actually, I maybe glossed over this. We're looking to doubt the plan. Like, what could go wrong? Why would it be the case that reducing the traffic congestion would not reduce the number of crashes? And then we've got something. Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised nobody picked E, because I think E would. In fact, sorry, it's a bit of an opposite, isn't it? Another city did it. It worked in another place. We've got our opposite trap. This would kind of support the planner's objective. So to focus a little bit more closely on answers A and D, coming back to the sort of second round, let's slot them in. Many crashes occur because the drivers involved are distracted. That's answer choice A. So does this really mean that the traffic congestion would not decrease the number of crashes? Well, it might a bit. It's like saying there's another issue at stake here. But let's compare it to answer choice D. D says traffic congestions tend to be preceded by crashes. So that actually, if I know something about causation, I might notice that the city planner is kind of claiming that the congestion is causing the crashes, and therefore, if we reduce the congestion, we'll decrease the number of crashes. So actually choosing here comes back to the way that I analyzed the argument, and I saw something about cause. I think I even saw some of you mention that. This is definitely an argument that involves, or a plan that involves causation. There's a cause here. Now, to go into D a little bit more deeply, if traffic congestion tends to be preceded by the crashes, i.e. the crashes are perhaps causing the congestion, then reducing the traffic congestion isn't necessarily going to reduce the number of crashes, because the causation actually goes the other way around. The congestion wasn't really the problem. The problem was that the crashes were causing the congestion in the first place. Right. Okay. So to compare answers D and A, I would be a little bit evasive, and I would say that answer choice A weakens the plan a little, a bit. Yeah, I'll give you that. In fact, I probably would say that maybe answer choice C weakens it a little bit as well, saying, yeah, sure, there are some other problems. But I want to train myself to see that D weakens the plan significantly. And therefore, D is going to be the right answer for this one. Okay, now this might still be annoying. You might still be saying, oh, but I still think this differently. That's okay. And let me warn you, actually. Well, first of all, I think that's quite good. It shows that you're sort of having a little argument, you're thinking independently, you're trying to engage with these questions. But I also know how annoying critical reasoning can be. Because I did actually mention sort of seeing the pattern. And this is something you'll get from some good experience from doing a whole bunch of problems, not just by doing them, but by training yourself to think in the way that they want you to think. And I think the key here was causation. Yes, and this is great. I'm agreeing, I think, with everything I see in the chat window. There's some good comments about causation and correlation. So that's the flaw that's going on here. We see two things happening at the same time, and it's very human. We think that they're connected. Just Dev, sorry, time out. Good question there. No, answer D is saying that the crashes are causing the congestion, not the other way around. I think this will be clear after what I'm about to say. So correlation, causation, if you haven't heard of this, go away and you can just Google correlation, causation. Here in a nutshell is what's going on. I was drinking coffee and I was happy. Like, lovely situation. Fantastic. Okay, so what does the coffee company want you to think in this advert? They want you to think that coffee is the cause of your happiness. Yeah, in fact, that's kind of the lie of all adverts. They show two things together, and we're kind of genetically programmed to see some connectionness. So they think that, or they want you to think that the coffee is making you happy. But actually, there's more that could be going on here. It could be that being happy causes you to drink coffee, right? Like, I don't know, I celebrate with a cup of coffee. I don't drink alcohol, I celebrate with coffee. They do in many countries. It could be the other way around, that when I'm happy, I go out and get a cup of coffee. So the actual causation could be the other way around. But even more interestingly, there could be another thing going on here. Actually, it could just be random. It could just be like, this situation, he's just having a nice day, happens to be drinking coffee. It's just not connected in any meaningful causation way. It's just random. Or it could be some third factor causing both of them. And if you've studied statistics, I'm sure this is familiar, correlation, causation. There could be this third factor. I don't know. For me, it's like GMAT study. I'm studying for the GMAT, and this causes me to feel good, and it also causes me to drink coffee. This is my sort of third thing. So we've got a whole bunch of situations, and we can actually label them. I mean, we could say that, I guess, A causing B, this was number one, and then B causing A, this is number two. The third one is just a random coincidence. And the fourth one, the very interesting one, the very real world situation is maybe some third thing causing both of them. So let's activate our critical minds. Can anyone think of a famous correlation causation error that they've heard of recently? Please share in the chat window. let you think. Anyone got a good correlation causation story? I've got loads I want to share, but I'm going to hold back because I want to hear any experiences you've had with correlation and causation. There's a really good point actually on that, and let me address those. Those are very good questions, but let me just ask you to activate your imaginations. Prices, very good. Yeah, very good. Like something about yeah. Although I mean that's complicated. Like to what extent does economic success drive voting patterns? That's there's a lot of research they have to do to try and uncover these. But yeah, think more simply. Think about weather. Think about I don't know, domestic examples like pets. Yeah, and see that's genuinely been. I mean, actually, like the connections. Okay, that I think it's a good example because it's very unlikely ice cream causes crime. That would be a flawed argument. But definitely, that weather and crime. There's some complicated statistics going on there. The one I heard recently, I genuinely heard this on the radio. A smart journalist said this. They said that people with dogs as pets tend to be happier, so we should encourage dog ownership to increase happiness. I was like, that was correlation causation in a nutshell. Like, oh no, it wasn't happy. They said they are healthier. Yeah, people who have a pet dog tend to be healthier, so we should encourage people to own pet dogs. And if you hadn't caught that already, well, maybe the kind of people who go out and buy a pet dog are the kind of people who like walking in the park to start with. It's not actually the causation there. So good. Okay. And actually, I see there's a whole bunch of questions. So this is going to be our last one today. We saw correlation causation, and I want to do good learning here and do a little bit of a recap on what we've seen. So perhaps, yeah, let me step back. We've seen 3 problems. We saw various things about plans. We've seen something about arguments. And I hope these problems were reasonably clear, but reflect on a few of the steps and the questions that I asked you. So here are some of those. I said, what's an argument? I said something about different flaws, and I even gave some labels to them. The differences between an argument and a plan, and what does it mean to criticize an argument? So just address these questions, because this goes very widely with your learning. But if you study something, we've only done 45 minutes, but at the end of that study time, if you can't kind of say clearly what you've learned or re-answer those questions, you're probably missing something. So if you look at these questions, I'm not going to ask you to answer them in the chat window at this point. In fact, there will be time for some questions I want to address. But I can say, as a sort of little bit of a stern teacher at this point, if you can't answer these questions clearly, then go back and rewatch this session when it's available on YouTube as a recording, because all these things are really worth being very clear about. And I talked about an argument being a conclusion and premises. We saw flaws of correlation, causation, but also unintended consequences, and even the sort of time delay, the forgetting to account for time in responses. Arguments and plans. So I said an argument is premises supporting a conclusion, and a plan is kind of a set of actions or a plan leading to an objective. And to criticize an argument, we used a bunch of marker words. We used we analyzed the premise conclusion, but we also used our good imagination to think, what could go wrong? And I think that's a very healthy question to ask. What could go wrong? So there may be some other things you've learned today, and in fact, there will be time for any more questions. But I also want to emphasize this mindset of critical thinking. So we saw attention to detail and logic as being 2 things which are so important for the GMAT. It really is a thinking exam. We can't avoid that kind of analytical thinking, but we actually forget that engagement and maybe even memory make quite a difference. But here, engagement meant thinking of your own examples. It meant connecting this to your real world experience. It meant imagining what could go wrong. And in fact, I can also apply this to those previous questions. I forgot to mention that if you could answer these questions, if you could teach somebody the answer to these questions with your own examples, that means you've really mastered the content. If you're just kind of repeating or memorizing, that's kind of like not quite the engagement that's going to lead you to succeed, especially on those harder questions. So engagement and memory, to emphasize that as well, holding in your mind, okay, what was the premise, what the conclusion, what could go wrong? This is actually a sort of little bit of a hidden part of problem solving that you can think of this. And think if I ask you like, what's 5 add 6? That's easy enough. But what's like 55 plus 67? We've got to remember more things. And the bigger the numbers get, the more we have to hold in our short-term memory in order to solve a problem. So the final thing about critical thinking is the kind of more soft skills. These tend to get neglected. Creativity really does play a big part. Using your imagination. Can I imagine the dogs in the grapeyard? In the grapeyard, the vineyard with the grapes. Like, can I actually sort of think of that? Even when I'm stressed and under pressure in the exam, is my creative brain still working? That's going to help me out. And the final one, which is maybe actually tends to be these days a little bit more addressed, like well-being. Like if you're exhausted, if you're stressed, if you hate the GMAT, it's a lot harder to deal with these things. So look after yourselves. I think that sleep, an extra hour of sleep before your test on Friday, will probably make a bigger difference than an extra hour of study. Staying in a good frame of mind is going to help out your critical thinking. So look, thank you very much for attending. I've left a little time for questions, but I hope this has been a useful overview of critical thinking for especially the reading comprehension and the critical reasoning parts of the GMAT. So thank you very much for attending, and I hope to see you again. You're absolutely welcome. Thanks for all your input. So if you've got time to hang around, I'm sure we've got some useful questions coming up. And I can go back. I can see if you, in fact, if you could repeat if you had a question from earlier. Sorry, I can't track everything through the chat window. So I'm going to go public. Somebody actually asked about the order of the test earlier on, and I think there's no secret here. In fact, I think that choosing the order is a bit of a I know I'm on recording here. It's like it's a little bit of a false win. I think that's a fair thing to say. It's not going to make a huge difference. Follow your common sense. If you want to start with your strength, if that feels better to you, go for it. If you want to start with your weakness because you're going to be fresher, then fine. The only thing I would say about the order is practice it. Do your practice test in the same order as your test. Don't chop and change every single time. Okay, then a few more questions here. Okay, so Bhavana, I'm sorry we didn't have time for any harder questions. You'll have to come back again or come to one of our classes. Or just check out the TTP resources. There are plenty of hard questions there. When we're down to 2 choices, yeah, Isadora, let me just read that question. Isadora asks, what would be your advice when we're down to 2 choices? Well, that's a little bit contextual. I think there's a number of choices I could make. Sometimes I'd be happy to take a guess on a really hard question. If time is running out, I might just have to bite the bullet. And you'll be surprised. You can do that on a few questions in the GMAT and still get a very good score. So long as you do it on the hard questions, because that's actually the important thing, that we don't mess up the easier questions. Now, so I mean, I've got a whole bunch of tricks or approaches. When I'm down to 2 choices, I would be looking very closely for the details. I would be looking back at the conclusion. I would be using all my critical thinking skills to help myself to decide between those 2. And yeah, there is a little bit of knowing the GMAT. So some of it, sometimes I'll just go, well, my kind of active knowledge is not working here. I'm just going to have to go on what I feel best based on my previous experience, some kind of half guess. Unati asks, if A causes B and B causes C, can we infer that A causes C? Wow, that is a very philosophical question, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that. I mean, I did do philosophy at college, so I should just say that actually causation is a really tricky area of philosophy. Like actually what causation is actually very contentious. And does causation even exist in the world? I'm not sure we can, that's a very big question for philosophers. So in some senses, I would say that I can infer from that, yeah, like I guess if A happens and if A is going to cause B, and B is going to cause C, then if A happens, then B is going to happen. Sorry, C is going to happen. Although I think it would just depend on the context, whether we could say like directly, my instinct says yes, but I'd probably have to think about that a little bit more. And also, I think it's a little out of the scope of the GMAT. So I'd say don't worry about that too much. Okay, increasing speed when doing verbal. This is Huyen. That's a very good question. How can I increase speed? I don't think there's a simple formula for that. You maybe saw the piano behind me at the beginning of the lesson. I teach piano, and it's kind of the same thing. When you start learning piano, you're going to learn slowly, get the fingers in the right place, fine. But you're not going to play slow forever. You kind of get faster by trying little bits faster, by choosing the place of your hands where you can move faster, and gently nudging yourself to increase the speed. So it's often not a straight path. If anyone's learned music, you don't go straight from playing slowly to playing fast. You have to do a lot of experimentation. Safe to say, though, I think this is one trap that I do see a number of students learning processes which work well when they're slow, but which actually are impossible to speed up. So this is if we do too much slow practice, we can actually just get in a slow habit, and we can stay slow, and that's great, but we can't speed up. So often when students are in that situation, it's because they're paying too much attention to detail. They're not seeing the big picture. They're not seeing the structure. And perhaps they're not seeing some of the other clues that the GMAT gives you. So I don't know about your situation, but those are sort of the general points about speed in the verbal. Okay. I can see a few more questions, and we might have to go a little faster. Thali says, okay, fantastic. That's a really good point. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Thuli. Aaron says, I want to ask you, if you eliminate all answer questions, how do you recalibrate when you're thinking to get the right answer? That's a good point. And that's my nightmare situation. When you go through a problem, you're like, no, 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 no. I've missed something. And that's a point that I would probably know that it's a hard question. At that situation, it depends where I am in the test, how much time I've got. I would probably go back to the passage and think if I've missed something significant in the passage. I would recheck my initial process. What's the conclusion? What's the question really asking? But yes, that's a situation where hopefully it's not going to happen too often. But yes, go back to the passage would be my simple response. Good, Thuli, thank you for your words there. Good, exactly, good point. Yash says, I'm done with all the topics of verbal. Should I revise topic by topic again before giving a mock exam? Good point. If you're done with all the topics, then you're probably ready for a practice exam, and you'll do the practice exam and you'll find out under pressure which topics worked out and which ones didn't. So that will give you plenty of data, but that might be a time for some mixed practice. So you can do that in TTP either with the custom tests. That's a very nice function where you can mix topics together, because that is an added challenge of the test, that you don't just do one type of question. You kind of have to be prepared for surprises, or perhaps official guide practice. That's another place where you're going to see a lot of jumbled up questions, and actually identifying the question types is part of the challenge. So that sounds like those two, custom tests or official guide, might be a good stepping stone before doing a practice test. Good. I think I addressed the speed doing verbal. Or what should I do next? Sorry, there was a following on from another question. Dev says the wordplay takes some time to understand. The question answer choice, is there any way to understand it quicker? I hope you saw some things today. Marker words, structure, know what an argument is. So when I come to reading an argument, I'm not just kind of a blank slate. It's an argument. I must have a conclusion. It's a plan. I must have some outcome they're hoping for. So that's the kind of prep of perhaps, I could count that as knowing the test a little bit, that I have some idea of what I'm looking for, particularly the conclusion. Stalin Jacob Matthew says, any tips on how to untangle those answer choices that carry double negatives and look confusing? If it means what it means, the opposite. Yeah, perhaps I would say leave them till last if it's one of those really, really convoluted answer choices, or cancel out the double negatives. Like I could go through and actually kind of, okay, so those two cancel out, so I'm going to simplify the answer choice. Godson says, asked about the recording. Yes, this should go onto YouTube. It should be available on YouTube. I don't know how long it will take to get up there, maybe a couple of days. Is there? You're welcome. In which case, look, we're just coming up to the hour. Any final questions? Anything I've missed? Have I not addressed? Please let me know. You're absolutely welcome. Look, in which case, time to close down the room. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks for your participation. All the best. Oh, yes, just, yes, exactly. Those are the two things, OG and mixed practice, the custom tests, if you've got that on TTP. And that was fun. That's a great thank you. That's exactly what I wanted it to be. Yes, fun is effective when it comes to study. Okay, all the best with your studies. Goodbye, everybody.